today we're going to go out on, definitely for myself, something I'm not 100% really an expert in any kind of way, but I know it's there. It's always been there. We're going to be talking about, neurodiversity, specifically in hospitality. And we're going to talk a bit about why this is so powerful and how we can actually use it to become better businesses. So we do that through, we have better retention of our people. We actually unleash innovation. And then in the end, of course, well-being for our staff. And I think we all know about people in hospitality that has some kind of diagnosis, maybe don't have a diagnosis, but we know there's something underlying and a reason why they actually choose hospitality, because they didn't have to sit behind a screen or so on. They need this kind of, energy that hospitality gives actually to manage themselves and their life. And that's everything from ADHD to other kind of diagnosis out there, but many of us actually don't have a diagnosis. I'm quite sure that most of us walks around with something, and we don't need the diagnosis, and that we're going to be talking about today. And Gareth is the guest today. I think he's extremely brave to talk about this, because we had a really interesting. Yeah, you're welcome, Gareth. Because I know my son is struggling with some stuff, and I know how hard this is when you don't feel like everyone else, and you find it difficult to find a space in the world. So welcome to the show, Gareth, and thank you so much for taking the bravery to talk about this and your experience of that as a hospitality leader.
No, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for allowing me to shine a light on hopefully something that, like you say, is definitely a prevalent issue in the industry. Those who may have diagnoses and those who may not, but like you say, a lot of people in the industry, there might be something there.
Yeah. And I don't know, we maybe should start talking about your journey, because I think your journey in a way and background actually led you to, you've released your first blog post. We're going to come back to that in a moment. But actually starting talking about this, putting words on this very difficult thing of neurodiversity and how it actually impacts the individual, but also the workplace when you're not aware of this.
Yeah, of course. So my hospitality journey started sort of all the way back when I was a child. So I was very lucky to grow up in the beautiful town of St. Ives down in Cornwall. And both of my parents were hoteliers. So I've been around the industry for as long as I can remember. And growing up in Cornwall, when you finish school, the obvious thing to do is go and get a summer job in a cafe, a bar, a restaurant in the town, which is what I did. I worked in a beautiful restaurant on the beach called West Beach Cafe down in Porthmeor Beach, and fell in love with it. Absolutely loved it. I loved the bars. I loved the bit of chaos. The fact that you never know what's around the corner, and the volume, the busyness. I loved it. But I decided I was going to be a PE teacher. I was very sporty back then. I played football, rugby, athletics, and that was the plan. And I went away didn't go away to college, but I went to college and did my A-levels, and then I was due to I did go to university to study a couple of years of sports science. But by this point, I've been working in the industry for about 5 years by that point. And do you know what? It had got under my skin. I really, really loved it. And people were starting to tell me, I was okay. I was pretty good at it. But I'd never, even though both my parents were hoteliers, I'd never really considered it as a career. But I went away to university and quickly realized that sports science wasn't just messing around playing rugby, and there was a lot of academic learning that you actually needed to do. And I still had hospitality on the mind. So I made the decision to change my course after 2 years, and I swapped from sports science to hospitality management, all at Cardiff Metropolitan University, which was a brilliant university to go to for both sport and for hospitality. And I graduated from Cardiff Met with a first-class honours degree in hotel management, which I was incredibly, incredibly proud of. After that, so I could have gone back to Cornwall and fallen into a trap, which is easy to do because it's such a beautiful place of bouncing from hotel to restaurant, and still learning, but not having sort of a formal foundation and training in place. So it was actually my mum who pushed me to seek out a graduate scheme with a hotel group and find a real sort of top hotel group in the country to sort of broaden my horizons and continue living away from home, which is what I did. And I joined the exclusive collection at the Manor House in Castle Combe on a graduate scheme. And that would have been 2019. So started in the September then and had a wonderful 6-month start. It was exactly what I needed. It was a real, formalized training. So the idea was you did 3 months in each of your departments. So the first month you were learning the ropes, the basics. The second month you were working at a supervisory level. And the third month you were working at a managerial level. And like I said, the first 6 months were fantastic. And then March 2020 rolled around and things changed for the whole world, and especially the hospitality industry as COVID came along. But I did my best to use that time to really make the most of it. And I spent a lot of time with the hotel closed. That was the perfect opportunity for us to do all the maintenance jobs that you never get to do when there's guests around. So I used that time to spend a lot of time with the maintenance team and actually just spend some one-on-one time with my GM and pick his brains a little bit and pick up all those little, nuggets of wisdom that he could give me, which was, now I look back, it was a really influential time in my career. And we went through a lot of change during that time. And I actually returned when we reopened. I came back to the hotel as assistant guest services manager, which was our reception function. So we kind of merged reception and concierge into one. I really, really enjoyed that. I'd primarily been food and beverage before that, but I knew if I was going to be a general manager in the future, I needed a rounded knowledge. And I spent 2 years doing the room side of things and really, really enjoyed my time there. But my love and my passion has always been food and beverage. And during my time in the rooms division, I was lucky enough to complete the Master in Holders Admiring Leaders Diploma, which was a fantastic opportunity. So I got to go and see lots of wonderful hotels and learn from the amazing Hilary Cook with Merlin. And it was fantastic. And it was that course that gave me the confidence then to apply for the food and beverage manager role when it came up at the Manor House, which I was very lucky to be given. And I was very excited to get back into food and beverage. But the Manor House has got a very large food and beverage function. So it's got the Bybrook Michelin-starred restaurant. They have obviously their bar and their lounge menus to look after, their afternoon tea function, alongside breakfast, and of course conference and banqueting and weddings to add to that as well. So with a team of around 30 staff to look after that, it was a big jump for me. And I knew it was going to be a big jump, but I think where I'd previously relied on my ability to provide guest service and work hard had got me that far. I now needed to facilitate others to provide that guest service. So of course, as you climb the ladder, your role becomes less operational, more administrative. And this is where, without wanting to sound arrogant, for the first time in the industry, I found things hard. And I really did find things hard, going, like I say, from a mostly operational role to a role that was probably 50-50 operational to administration, was a really tough transition for me. And it was at this point that, like I say, I started to struggle, and I found myself, obviously I'm now told, we start having discussions around payroll budget and labor costs and all of that side of things, and saving on hours where possible. And I did what many, many, many managers I'm sure have done, and had the great idea that, I just cover that payroll cost myself, obviously, and I just do my job as a manager. But then I also spend 30 hours a week being a waiter as well. That really doesn't work. As I found out, it's not sustainable. You become ineffective in your role, and I ended up burning myself out based on the fact that I don't necessarily think it was the volume of hours. I think it was the stress of knowing that I wasn't achieving and wasn't doing the best that I could for my team. And I found myself in a position where on my days off, I would be bedbound. But the time when I was awake, I'd then be worrying about what was happening in the operation and nervous of checking my phone in case I had an email from somebody telling me something had gone wrong, or, you know, one of my members of the team had a problem, had an issue. And that really started to take its toll then on my personal life. So my wonderful partner, Anna, we have a home where we've got 2 dogs and a cat, and, you know, there's lots to do around the house, but I was expecting her to carry the both physical and mental load of working full time and also looking after the home. You know, if I did any laundry, it was my uniform for the week following. If I, you know, did any washing up, it was because I was physically out of plates to eat off. And as you can imagine, that takes its toll on someone. And so it was Anna that, you know, like I say, she was incredible during that time. And she pushed me to say, look, something seems to have changed here. Something isn't right here. And it was around about this time that I started to be, you know, ADHD and neurodiversity sort of started to gain traction on social media. And I was served content around, you know, people talking about symptoms lists and what ADHD looks like. And a lot of those symptoms lists resonated with me, but I was still very much at that point under the impression that ADHD was something for the hyperactive little boys who, you know, bounced off the walls in a classroom, and that wasn't me. I was okay in school. I was distracted, but, you know, I did okay. So I didn't think that was me. And eventually then it was Anna that said, well, look, maybe this is something you should explore. Maybe this is something you should have a chat about. And that's what I did eventually. So I did go and see that. I went to my GP. I took a list of symptoms that I had experienced that I knew could have been consistent with ADHD. And my doctor was wonderful. She said, you know, look, the symptoms list you presented me, it does sound consistent with ADHD, but I would need to make a referral to mental health service for the next steps. And she was very honest in the fact that those next steps, the waiting lists are very, very long, sort of 2 to 4 years and over in some cases. She did say that if the option was available to me to look at a private diagnosis, then to potentially research that option, which I did. And I was very privileged to be in a position where, you know, I not necessarily comfortably affords, but I was able to pursue a private diagnosis. And I remember I did the kind of final consultation call with the clinician, and we got to the end of that call, and he said to me, Gareth, following this phone call, I'm able to say that it's clear to me that you have combined type ADHD, so both hyperactive and inattentive. He's probably said those words a million times, and I remember the impact those words had on me was incredible. And I remember coming off that call and just sitting there in silence for about an hour, just thinking and realizing that I wasn't just lazy or, you know, not able to achieve, that I had a genuine neurological difference that meant that my brain works differently to others, and that certain things work for me, certain things don't work for me. And I'd spent my life using systems that weren't the best systems for me. Typically, I procrastinated on then following the medication route. And to be honest, I did at certain times use my diagnosis as an excuse, which was absolutely the wrong thing to do. And I actually then found out the burnout didn't improve. I was still sort of spiraling down. And it took a point where I started a new role as the deputy general manager at the Pig in the Cotswolds, which is where I am now. And I knew that I had to change. I knew I had to to do the research and find systems that worked for me, and research medication and see if that was the right thing for me, which is what I did. And I put in a lot of work during my notice period at the Manor House to, like I say, find the systems that worked or could potentially work, do a lot of research into medication and pursue medication. And I started my new role in the middle of August 2024. And for first 3 months worked, or probably first 4 to 5 months worked really, really well. And then could kind of feel the novelty wearing off a little bit. Those systems became a bit boring. And it was at that point that I shared my diagnosis with my manager, my hotel director. And that was like the final piece of the puzzle. So it was all well and good me having my systems. But if I don't have those above me understanding of the way I work, then I couldn't employ those systems fully, and they couldn't get the most from me, and I couldn't get the most from myself. So I think we'll sort of come on to talk about what businesses can do, and how we as leaders can help those within our teams as we get further into the podcast. But that, like I say, that was the final piece of the puzzle, was being able to share my diagnosis with my employer and work together to improve. And now I'm more than happy to say that, don't get me wrong, I still struggle with certain things, and also knowing the things that I will struggle with is one of the big things for me. But, if I look at myself where I am now compared to where I was 2 years ago, the transformation is incredible. I live a different life now, and a much, much more happier one.
What do you think there was in that conversation with your director that changed the game for you? Like, besides, I guess talking about it and being honest is one thing, but that was like, is there some like magic thing that happened?
I think it was her curiosity and lack of prejudice. So there was no, I think going into that conversation, I was worried that, well, actually, no, I knew the conversation would go well. I'd worked with her for long enough, and I knew the conversation was going to go well. I had the confidence to open up by that point. Had it been a different person, then I may have been going into that conversation worried that I was going to be met with the old line of, everyone gets a bit like that. Nobody enjoys doing admin. Everyone feels like that, which would have been the worst thing, because it would have just dismissed my struggle, and I would have closed off and felt like I couldn't discuss this any further, and I wouldn't have been able to access, the change in work that we needed to work together even better. It was the question, immediately after that conversation, the question was, thank you for sharing that. What can I do? How can I be the best leader for you? And it's, like I say, it was the question of what do you need from me? It wasn't okay, yeah, like, okay, I get that, yeah. And again, it wasn't dismissed. It was a genuine curiosity that I was met with, and that allowed me then to share the things that work best for me.
And that set you out on I get that conversation was also the trigger point for why we're sitting here, because you went out on a journey, became quite proactive. You launched your first blog as well. But what did that conversation actually really trigger? And besides actually got easier in your job, it also triggered you to go out in the world and start putting words on this,
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, some of the real kind of easy key wins from that conversation that we put in place immediately were things such as we would have kind of weekly sit-down catch-ups. Being hotel director and DGM, it's typical for us to be kind of like shits passing in the night and work back-to-back shifts. So we don't actually get to spend that much time together. So we try and carve out an hour a week just to sit down, have a conversation. I remember before that conversation, I didn't want to sit there and so one thing that really helps me is making notes on my phone so I can refer to them when I need to. Verbal conversations, I'm engaged and I'm listening, but a lot of what is said between two people will simply leave my mind as soon as that conversation is done. And that doesn't mean I'm not interested or engaged. It's just the way my brain works, unfortunately. So after that conversation, I was able to say, look, when we're having these chats, do you mind if I make notes on my phone? I'm not just, getting bored and replying to a WhatsApp or an email. I'm making notes on my phone. She was like, yeah, absolutely. Of course you can. Another thing that was really great was when tasks were delegated to me to have that in writing via an email, just with the clear task and a deadline. And that meant that I wouldn't forget the tasks that we'd verbally discussed. But also it set a deadline, which meant I knew exactly when that needed to be done by, and then I could achieve that task by then. And like I said, then improving my workflow. And it was a few months later, by sheer coincidence, I was at a group DGM meeting, so all of the DGMs from across the big group together at headquarters, and we had a neurodiversity training with a lady called Shell from We Were Couple Loudly, who's absolutely wonderful. And it was really great to see the group doing this training. It really showed me that this was something they cared about, and this was something that they were committed to learning about as a group. And I remember just coming away from that and emailing Shell afterwards to thank her for the wonderful training and for her time, and shared a little bit about my story. And it was Shell that told me that I should share my story with the Burn Chef Project. And the Burn Chef Project, again, a wonderful organization who are doing great things for the industry. And I'd never really considered that my story could be impactful or anything like that. And I reached out. Shell put me in touch with the Burn Chef Project, and we had a discussion. They were like, yeah, we'd absolutely love to run a blog post on this. And I remember writing that blog post and going through different drafts and different versions, and absolutely loved doing it. Found it really therapeutic, really enjoyed writing it. And that got me to thinking kind of, okay, maybe this is something I could do to help people. And I'm sure I'm not the only one in this boat in the industry. Like we mentioned before, there's a certain type of person that works in hospitality, that's for sure. That's drawn to the fact that it's not a 9-to-5 office job. And so that's where the idea of AD Hospitality D came from, was sharing my stories and sharing blog posts that aim to help those in the industry who have or are neurodiverse, but also sharing posts for leaders in the industry who may not be neurodiverse, but it's more than likely you will have a team member who is neurodiverse, and sharing ways of which you can be accommodating to them and ways of which you can improve your culture to be more accepting of neurodiversity, and making people in your team feel welcome to share their neurodiversity. And just being able to, as I said, when I made that first blog post, if that helps one person, have a better time in the industry, then I've done what I wanted to do.
What is the big vision for your work besides your day-to-day job, but with your work on your campaign and, going out to make neurodiversity a more normal thing in workplaces to talk about and action on?
Yeah, absolutely. So the big vision is to make hospitality as neurodiversity-friendly as possible. And that, at the moment, is starting with me sharing my blog posts and running an Instagram account that, as I said, is aimed for people either who are neurodiverse in the industry or leaders within the industry. Down the line, I'd like to grow that into a business where I would be able to offer training to businesses on what neurodiversity is and how they can build their culture to be accepting of neurodiversity. Accommodations that could typically be made, ways that they can get the most from their team, who may be neurodiverse. And again, the overall goal is to make hospitality as neurodiversity friendly as possible. The ways in which I do that, I hope, are just going to keep growing and growing.
Is there any, like, we just stay at the workplace, and is it like your boss apparently was curious, you said that's really important for people that's walking with something they feel is quite heavy. And it's about, I often call it, with my son, I call it, how do we make you feel good inside? Yeah. Because if you feel good inside, you can break down any kind of challenge. Yeah.
100%.
If you don't feel good inside, that challenge is going to eat you, no matter how big and small it is.
Absolutely.
And what can leaders do that actually, because they might know there is something, but they can see sometimes, for example, deadlines are not met, stress level goes up extremely. I've seen that with a lot of people when they suddenly, because hospitality is not chaos, but it's very complex and changes in a high speed sometimes. So suddenly there's more guests than you expected. The beer didn't arrive that should have been for the bar, so therefore you don't have any beer. There's all these sudden changes, which for most people is very stressful. And therefore, some people that thrive in it, but then when you have had 10 days with that, then you start shutting down and you start, that's where burnout comes from. But how do you as a manager help these people to see these early signals? Is there like some top tips? I know everybody's different. That's probably what we need to talk about as well. But I guess there's something that you can actually start to get aware of this, and actually start thinking about this, so you don't get surprised. When you work with a group of people of plus 50 people, then you definitely have some people within that group that has some kind of neurodiversity.
Yeah, of course. I think it's a mixture of things. I think one of the, as I mentioned, creating a culture where your team feel, it doesn't even have to be around neurodiversity, but just creating a culture where your team feel that you are an approachable leader, and they can come to you. And if they are feeling stressed, that again, that's not going to be met with, judgment. The next question is going to be, okay, why are you feeling stressed? What's making you feel stressed? How can we work together to make this better for you? You mentioned it in the question. If you're not happy inside, how are you then going to take on any challenge? I know it's an old cliche, but it's something that I genuinely live by day to day. My leadership is happy staff make happy guests. Yeah. I think that's my biggest sort of leadership mantra. And with regards to what people can be doing day to day, I think one thing potentially is sharing a little bit of your own difficulties. Not always putting this brave face on. There's times when, of course, you are the leader and you need to lead and you need to put a brave face on things. But also there's real space to show vulnerability. And if you're finding something difficult, you can, it's a fine line to tread, but you can show a little bit of vulnerability as a leader, because your junior team members, if they're struggling with something, but their perception of you is that you find every single thing you do incredibly easy and you never get stressed, and you are this perfect 100% person, then that's just going to make them feel like they're not very good because they're getting stressed. Whereas, like I say, it's a fine line to tread. Nobody wants a leader who's lost their head. But if something was difficult, share that with your team. You can tell them, that was a difficult service today, guys, but really well done. We pulled together and we worked hard. Like I say, vulnerability allows people then to be vulnerable with you. And then that allows you the opportunity to help them with their challenges. If you've got a team who don't feel comfortable sharing their challenges with you, then they're just going to keep trying to face those challenges on their own. And they may not be in the position to face those challenges on their own yet. Whereas you as a leader should be able to help them overcome those challenges. So I'd say, yeah, a quick, sort of not a quick win, but something you can maybe do tomorrow is to show a bit of vulnerability and, highlight an area of difference that you have, or something that may make someone feel comfortable sharing with you.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think I might be wrong, and people are to say you're wrong, Michael, but I think in general in the industry there's this, like, you have to be tough and almost like a lead soldier in hospitality sometimes, like from a mindset point of view. Mm-hmm. And actually, it's actually quite interesting if you are vulnerable. I'm thinking back on my time as ops director and say, I actually really struggle with this opening, or because there's so many things flying at me, I will drop a ball once in a while. Actually, when you start saying that, some of the people that's below you start to catch those balls because they don't want you to see failing. So it's actually also people will then start leading up because they'll see.
Absolutely.
And then you get like a really, really beautiful relationship, because that's actually what it's about. The quality of the relationship we have at work are really determined, as you call it, happy employees, but I call it just the quality of the relationship we had at work with our bosses and co-workers and suppliers and so on actually determines the quality of the outcome you deliver to the guests, and that determines the profit, and the profit determines the growth of the business and all that stuff. I think it really is a challenge for most, because we, as an industry, on set or said, really focusing on, we just have to work through this week, but we just forget another week comes after that. So we are not preparing for actually the right thing. It's not about exactly, it's really free things, as you say. These are conversations, these are free. And you also mentioned that she was curious, like, and I think that's really that you can feel somebody's interested in your situation, trying to understand, because often you don't know. You might read diagnosis, you might have been on a workshop you have been running, but you really don't understand it before you're in the situation where you're either dealing with somebody that has it or being diagnosed yourself. And I know for my son, we still don't understand the full grasp of his diagnosis, as he has dyspraxia. And but we are working through that, and we have accepted we can't just build a bridge. We are helping all the time to make the future better. And it's not always about what's get better tomorrow. It's about how you feel in 10 years' time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, if we set Gareth in the ideal situation, there's probably a lot of people who are not out there and think, yeah, I'm definitely dealing with that. But how do we then get to where we are better at that? How would it look maybe in 5 years from now? How would the industry look? Because I guess this is now coming on to the surface in many of the Burn Chef projects, the work you're doing. But how do you think it's going to change as we go forward in the industry? Because I guess we can't now. It's like we are aware, we have the knowledge, it's put out there. Yeah. We will have to deal with it, because it is really maybe one of the big things that can actually unleash better quality of workplaces.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there are accommodations that can be made, and they are easy accommodations. So, for example, things such as, I know some people who have autism and suffer with processing different senses. So, for example, could become very overwhelmed where there is a lot of noise happening. Found wearing things such as loop earbuds really, really helpful for them, because it dampens some of that noise down and allows them to feel less overstimulated. And, in 10 years' time, 5 years' time, I'm not saying you're going to walk into a coffee shop and every single person is going to be wearing loop earbuds. That's not the point. Or, all the lights are going to be dimmed. That's not the point. The point is that, you walk into a coffee shop and your barista may well be wearing loop earbuds. And instead of there are some people who would see that and think, well, that's rude. That person's wearing earbuds, and they should be solely focused on me as the guest. And actually, it's an industry where there is a person who's wearing loop earbuds, and instead of the initial reaction being, well, no, that's not right, the initial reaction is, okay, cool, or I wonder why that person chooses to wear loop earbuds. Maybe I'll ask them about it. And having a conversation about those things. And accommodations for neurodiversity come in many, many, many different shapes and forms. And they can't even necessarily be sort of condensed by condition, because I know people with ADHD who struggle with overwhelm with regards to sensory conditions, who would prefer lower noise and sort of dimmer lights, whereas I am the opposite. I struggle in silence, and I like some background noise, and I like the sound of pots clanging and the chef's radio and whatnot. So for me, loop earbuds wouldn't work, but for someone else, they're a fantastic accommodation. And I think that's the thing, is it's seeing someone maybe who has a little fidget toy in their hand, and again, it's not, why have you got that? That's for kids. It's, well, that's what. Why'd you use that? How does that help you? And allowing them, if they want to explain that, and building an understanding, and maybe that's where we are in 5 years, and then a further 5 years on, is that, like I say, those things are accepted and normal, and accepting the fact that different people need different things.
What is the biggest barrier, you think, for that future where it's a bit more less judgmental? I guess that's what you're saying in between the lines. People are a bit more judgmental. They're actually more curious and interested what's actually going on for that person.
I think there's, I think the biggest barrier towards that is the stereotypes and stigmas that surround neurodiversity. People talk, like I say, I mentioned earlier, I held the stereotype that ADHD was for hyperactive little boys. There's some very harmful stereotypes around people with autism, and people believing that because someone is neurodiverse, that they are not going to be as good a team member as someone who is not. And breaking stereotypes is incredibly difficult. I think one way that we can do it is for role models in the industry to come to the forefront. I'm not sat here calling myself a role model, but I'm someone in the industry who has done okay, and I'm here saying, I hold my hands up. I have ADHD, and I've achieved what I have achieved, and therefore that means that someone else with ADHD can also achieve what I have achieved. And I'm sure there are many, many leaders who have achieved far greater things than I have, who will have ADHD, will have autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, many, many types of neurodiversity. And if we as leaders can be open about the differences that we have and the struggles we've faced and how we've overcome them, then hopefully we can start breaking down some of those stereotypes and, showing people that, like I say, just because I've got ADHD doesn't mean I can't be an effective leader, or even at the junior level, an effective waiter, housekeeper, for example. I think we need to be open and honest and try and break down those stereotypes, definitely.
Yeah, it's also like, of course, you are like, sometimes I've heard in conversation with employees or people that reports to me over the years that they don't feel worthy. Like, I'm not as worthy as others. And it's like, you're a human being, you're as worthy as anyone else. It's like, there's nothing with title to do or diagnosis to do. We have the same value. And I think that's really where hospitality also have a huge opportunity to bring conversations like this to the workplace, where it's allowed actually when you can talk about it, how powerful it can become for the business as well. Like allowing that to happen and actually help and support that in that environment. There's things you talked about now. I'm thinking, well, there's nothing expensive in this. It's actually getting committed and focused on that and actually being curious and brave enough to actually having these conversations, not being scared of it. And I think lots of people are saying, oh, well, I don't want to get into that because then it almost become an HR legal kind of matter or a diversity kind of thing. And that's not what it's about. Actually, it's actually about how you get the best out of your people. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the thing is, you mentioned a HR perspective, and that is a huge part of this. Neurodiversity falls under disability and the protected characteristics, but actually, burying your head in, if for any sort of people in development or HR managers, sort of neurodiversity exists and it's out there, and you can't do anything about that. It's always going to exist. The best thing you can do is get in front of it. And burying your head in sand and pretending it doesn't exist is only going to cause you difficulties in the long run. The best thing you can do is to create a business where you help people with neurodiversity. And I spoke to a HR manager friend of mine, and she was telling me she was in the middle of, I think it was 3 separate disciplinary proceedings, and all of which were tied up with a neurodiversity diagnoses. And the incidents that had led to the disciplinary proceedings were all linked in some way, shape or form, sort of circled back to that person's neurodiversity. And I think if potentially there'd been, I'm not saying you can create a perfect workplace, but if you're able to provide accommodations and a working environment that best suits your people, then, those disciplinary proceedings and those incidents that occur because of someone's neurodiversity are going to decrease, and, the environment is definitely going to improve.
Yeah. I don't think, again, it's back to being curious again, isn't it? And it's about being brave as well. And don't be afraid of it, as you said, because it's there. We need to put it on talking about and not make it into a matter, a legal matter, whatever it is. Because actually most people that has the condition have no interest in making that. They just want to be normal or function people, like nobody's normal. I had somebody boss so said to me, like, nobody's normal, Michael. Everybody has individual needs that you need to meet as their boss and try to understand. That's the complex bit, and that's what you need to become good at. Like running the business is not complex. What's complex is the complex human beings that's within it. And if you can unleash each individual's skills and actually make them feel worthy or part of it, they will give you huge trust, and that trust, as you say, will come back in huge performance. There was one question, I wanted to touch a couple more questions before we end this conversation. How do you, Gareth, show up pro every day as a leader? How do you actually set yourself up? What is your tricks? I guess you found some routines or something that sets you off when you have to go to work that day, and I'm going to meet a lot of unknown factors and stress level is going to be high. I have to remember a lot of deadlines, a lot of feedback you get. And you said, like, you will have a lot of face-to-face feedback you have to remember. And how do you set you up for self-success?
So what I do is for some people, they may not see this as lucky, but for me, I do see it as luck in the fact that, so I have a 45-minute commute to and from work every day. And I really make the most of that time to switch on in the morning. So when I'm driving to work, I've got, a podcast or a bit of music on in the background, and I'm thinking about the day ahead. The amount of, I've got a really good app on my phone where, it's similar to Siri, but essentially I can speak into my phone and it will make a note for me, because the amount of things that pop into my head whilst I'm driving, and I'm like, I've got ADHD, I need to write that down or I'm going to forget. But then of course I'm driving, that pop in, a lot of my ideas come when I'm driving into work. And so I'm thinking about the day ahead. I'm thinking about what I need to achieve. I'm thinking about what I've got coming up today. I'm thinking about, that meeting at 4:00, what do we want to get from that meeting? What points do I want to make? What outcomes do I need from that meeting? And then when I get into work, it's just taking 10 minutes, just have a coffee, sit down, and then put that down on paper. And, this is far from revolutionary stuff at the moment. But, what do I want to achieve that day? And that could be a list of 20 things. That could be a list of 3 things. And also, I've been in the industry long enough to know that no day in hospitality goes as you planned it to. Something will come up, something will change. And for that reason, it's then not being hard on yourself. Do you not achieve what you set out to? Plans change, the day changes, especially in hospitality. It's such a fluid industry. A myriad of things can happen that can throw your day off course. And those things happen, and those things are out of your control. You can be reflective, and you can look back at, what you set out to achieve. And if you didn't quite achieve what you wanted to, you can have a think about why that might have been, and you can definitely reflect on that. And then it's, taking time when I'm driving home to then do the opposite and just really switch off, not listening to, I often listen to the news on my drive home just to take my mind off it and just really switch off, so that when I arrive home in the evening, I'm ready to be away from work, and I'm ready to be at home, and I'm ready to be, stop being the DGM and be Gareth. And that allows me to really decompress and switch off when you're at home, because you can only carry that mental load for so long of constantly being switched on. And then, funnily enough, one of the biggest things that has helped me as someone with ADHD goes against a lot of what people will have been taught. And I do not eat the frog first, I eat the frog last. So it's classic productivity sort of advice is to eat the frog, get that big task done, out the way. If I try and do that, I will sit at my laptop and I will freeze. I will find any distraction possible, because I do not have at that point in time, I do not have the level of dopamine required for me to make a start on that big task. What I need to do is, if I've got a list of 10 things and I've got, big task on there, I know I need to knock off 5 quick, easy wins. Just, reply to that email, reply to that second email, just quick, easy wins. That are going to building momentum. It's getting that bit of dopamine going in my brain, getting, I tick something off, I'm ticking that next thing off. Right, yeah, right, that's good to go. And I've done sort of 5 of those. Right, now I'm ready for that big task. Now let's go. Now let's make a start. And that's the thing, like I say,
it's quite interesting, and I think a lot of people in hospitality have that thing. So if you listen to this, I've seen it so many times, because I am a bit like I love productivity ways to get around. I also know they have their limitations. I always say, what is the limitation here if it doesn't work for a person? And I actually found often out, I ask people instead of eating the frog, you have to ask the question, leader, what are the things that stresses you most you have on this list you just made with 100 things or 20 things or 10 things? And there's many people out there, it often comes down to really small things. So why are you delaying it? Because I've learned in this leadership development course, I need to challenge the big thing. But if you get the big thing done before the deadline, it actually doesn't matter when you do it. You need to do it when. Exactly. And it's really interesting when you talk about getting momentum. It's the most important thing to feel good inside, Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm actually winning. I'm pushing the flywheel. I'm in control. In the degree I can be. So I thought that was really, really interesting example. Just made me reflect and think about it. I was smiling because I think, I've had a lot of these conversations. I've never thought about it in that thing, eat the frog, the stress of that, sitting there, Absolutely. And it's quite funny, just to my own reflection, and I don't know, I've never been diagnosed with anything, but what that can really stresses me out if I have a lot of small admin tasks, I really don't like them, and it just it drain me from energy. But if I have 10 huge projects, don't get stressed about that. I'm just working through it. It's easy for me. I can block time off for 3 hours, and I would start with the big frog. I would love to start with that. I'd hate when there's 100 smaller tasks I need to do.
Mm.
And it's funny how different we are. And that's probably something that triggers in me. So I always delegate a lot of small tasks because I don't want to, and I'm not really happy with emails. It's just like something I need to be done, but I'm not really great at it. Funny enough. Yeah. But I've learned to deal with it, and I found a system that works for me in that way. But so we all have these things and challenges we need to go around. What is the one thing you wished, Gareth, I've asked you today, because we of course talked about this for hours. What would that be, and what would you have answered to that question?
I would say, I wish you'd asked me, what advice would I give to someone who is neurodivergent in the industry?
Yeah.
And my advice would be that if you do feel comfortable to share your diagnosis or your perceived potential diagnosis with your employer, you do not need a clinical diagnosis for this to be valid. As we mentioned earlier, clinical diagnoses are very difficult to come by. And I would say that you should, if you feel comfortable, because it allowed me to unlock the sort of final part of my puzzle in, productivity and being happy in my job role. I was met exactly how I would have wanted to have been met. So I was met with curiosity and brilliant, right? How can we work together? What's the next steps? In the instances that you are not met in the correct way, and unfortunately there are leaders who will not greet that conversation in the correct way. It might be a tough thing to hear, but that employer probably isn't the right fit for you anyway. And if you're at a point where you feel that you do need to share your diagnosis, because you're struggling in any way, and now either it's going to be met really well and things are going to improve, best outcome, fantastic. Or, you know what? It could be met badly. And this sounds like a really brutal piece of advice, but if it's met badly, then that employer isn't right for you. And maybe it's time for you to look at another job role, which sound, like I say, it's a brutal piece of advice. However, if you stay in that job role and you're already struggling and you're not able to work with your employer because of your neurodiversity and find the way of working that works for you, then things aren't going to get better on their own. And things are only going to get worse. So it's a gamble. I get that. But you're either going to find out that this is the right employer for you, or you're going to find out that this isn't the right employer for you. And then, do you know what? You've saved yourself 6 months.
Yeah, maybe many years of...
Or many years, yeah, absolutely.
Or pain, and life is short, so we need to get the best out of it. Where can people, if you want to know more, where can they find you and the blog and connect with you online and follow your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So the website for my blog is adhospitalityd.com. And I've got my blog posts on there, along with some posts about sort of everyday items that help me, podcasts that I enjoy, audiobooks that I enjoy, alongside sort of other resources for people in the industry or leaders in the industry. I like to be quite active on Instagram as well. Again, that's at ADHospitalityD. And please feel free to reach out to me personally on LinkedIn. If anyone wants to have a conversation, either you want to discuss about potential neurodiversity in yourself or a member of your team, or you just want to reach out, then LinkedIn's a really great way of doing that for me. And that's just Gareth Rees, REES. But then also feel free to pop me an email if you'd like to, which is just gareth@adhospitality.com. And I'd be more than happy to have a chat with anyone. Absolutely.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you, Gareth, for being brave and come and talk about this and your journey and share that with others. I hope it inspire other people and lead us to maybe start asking questions, be more curious, be more compassionate.
Absolutely.
And I'm sending you power and energy to the journey ahead.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you.